This is Pritam Singh. I am going to be moderating the panel on Indian farmer success and its international significance. Apart from me, there will be other three panelists. I am a professor emeritus in economics at Oxford Brookes Business School, and I have regularly written and spoken on the farmers' protest and its magnificent success. And the three other people are first, who will follow me would be Joginder Singh Ugrahan, who is a leader of one of the topmost farmers organization who participated in this protest. Second would be Navsharan Singh. She was very active in mobilizing women and highlighting the role of women, especially landless workers. And the third will be Navkiran Natt, who has been very instrumental in publicizing and using the digital technology to bring a different alternative than the alternative the Hindu nationalist government in India was bringing about the farmers' protest, which was very negative. And this group in which Navkiran was involved played a very important role in giving to the world an alternative view of the protest. So I will start with my presentation first, and will be followed by Mr. Ugrahan, Navsharan, and Navkiran. So I have titled my presentation as Indian Farmers' Victory in Resisting Agro-Business Capitalism and India's Centralized Governance. So what I'm going to cover is the following, giving you an overview. So to just give you an idea about my presentation, I'm going to cover these three main aspects in the limited amount of time we have. That how centralized capitalism governance in India has changed over a period of time, and farmer success in resisting agro-business agenda and political centralization and authoritarianism, and then the further prospects and challenges for agrarian and development paradigms which follow from that. So to go back to the centralized capitalist governance in India, one can broadly divide this period into two parts in India's post-independence history after it got independence from British colonial rule in 1947. One is from 1947 to 1991, where the format or paradigm of capitalist development was, which can be kind of argued as interrelationship between capital, state, and nation, in which planning played a very important role, centralized planning. And the argument behind that was that in a newly developing country, the central planning through the public sector has to play a very important role in industrialization, and also centralized planning has also have a very important role in nation building of the new nation. And so that led to increasingly greater role of the central government in India's governance, because we should remember that India is a federal state with many regions, with different languages, different histories, different memories, and the attempt was to make into one nation, which I'm very critical in many ways, but just to kind of recognize that that was the first phase from 1947 and 1991, in which state played a very important role in developing capitalism and building the project of one nation, India. Then the post-1991 period, where the capital state nation played a very important role, but in a new neoliberal regime, where state withdrew considerably from participation in the economy, where the public sector was kind of diminished, and the planning apparatus was diminished. Greater role was given to the market mechanism, but the project of nation building remained the same. It did not change. So it was tweaking of the old project of nation building in a new neoliberal regime, rather than abandoning that regime. And that was done both during the pre-Hindutva government, which was the Congress government, which is the biggest Congress political party in India, as well as the Hindutva project, which started becoming more powerful from 2014, when the present Prime Minister came into power, Mr. Modi. And they have pushed this nation building to the uttermost limit. And with another addition to that, that's a Hinduized nation. The Hinduized nation was more hidden and compromised in the previous regime changes and various economic regimes which I have discussed, but it became much more dominant and declared policy of the state. And the neoliberal economic reforms which were introduced in agriculture become a part of where the farm laws were introduced and farmers registered that. So how did the farmers resist this agribusiness capitalism and also the centralization and authoritarianism? One was to repeal 3 farming laws that promoted agribusiness takeover of agriculture. These 3 forms were basically, one was to increasingly put the role of big agribusiness firms in marketing of products, in transportation of products, in stock taking of products, and therefore, diminishing the role of family farming, small farming, converting India into a country where large-scale farming takes place under a capitalist method of production. And so these 3 farms, one was this. Second was to remove the minimum support price, which is a kind of support price given to small farmers where their produce is bought by the government and is distributed through the public distribution system to poor farming and rural and urban communities. And the third was the Essential Commodities Act, Amendment Act, which was basically to give role to big digital takeover to stockpiles and remove any limits that big players could stock as much as they could, which could actually lead to creating deficit and a rise in prices and putting more pressure on households to buy food at the prices which could be even more than the existing market prices. And the farmers' organization organized themselves brilliantly, starting from Punjab and then going to Haryana, which has been the backbone of increase in farming in the last 40, 50 years, and then spreading over to other northern Indian states, but also drawing support from all other parts of the country. And they were able to defeat, it took more than 1 year, but they were able to defeat this centralized government control of agriculture. I put down in my slide temporarily because we know that the government is committed to deregulation of agriculture, to increase the agribusiness capitalism control, which is being pushed both by internal big capitalists, agribusiness capitalists, also by external international businesses like cartel and supported by international organizations like WTO. So they have accepted this defeat, but it may be temporary defeat, and that will be a challenge for the farmers' movement, how to now respond later on after these farming laws have been defeated. But this was a major, major defeat, which has huge implications. And one of the ways the farmers' organization were able to defeat these farming laws and the Hindu nationalist government centralized agenda was to also support regional identity. As I mentioned earlier, India is a very multiple and plural country where there are some of the states whose populations is actually more than half the countries in the world, and certainly more than many of the European countries. And they have their own languages, they have their own history, they have their own memory, they have their own culture. And in one state, they played a very important role, especially in West Bengal, and where they defeated the Hindu nationalist central party, BJP, but supported the local regional party, and that came into power. The other major factor in getting this movement success was the farmers' capacity to sustain through food. And let me take a few minutes to explain this. That in many organizations and their struggles, especially among the industrial workers and urban workers, when they go on strike, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and then the pay does not come home, and the purchasing power capacity declines, trade unions are also not able to support every member, then there is a kind of a problem in the household. The children are going hungry or semi-hungry, women are under greater stress, the morale starts breaking down. What was amazing about this farmers movement was that they ensured continuous supply of food. There will be other difficulties, that in winter there will be other problems, in summer there will be mosquitoes, and to save them from themselves, and also rain and dust storms, and also all those problems were there. But one thing was continuous, that the food will be supplied, in which the Sikh tradition of langar. Sikhism is a small religion in India. Globally, it is the fifth largest religion in the world, but the Sikhs constitute only 2% of India's population. But they are majority population in Punjab, about 58%. They have a long tradition of what is called langar. Langar means collective kitchen, where everyone, irrespective of their gender, caste, etc., can participate in cooking food and then sharing food. And it is a centuries-old tradition, and set up by the founder of the Sikh faith, Guru Nanak. And so farmers were able to mobilize on this historical tradition. And this langar is a big institution. It's not something you just do it. That you have to mobilize, the provisions. You have to cook food. You have to distribute this food. You have to clean the utensils, and they have centuries-old institutional mechanism to do that. So the farmers' organization were able to draw upon this long-established, centuries-old tradition of langar to provide food. It was a very important element in ensuring the success of the farmers' movement. The other was, it was a peaceful mass mobilization, in which not only farmers but also non-farmers, they mobilized industrial workers, employees in the cities, middle-class professionals, doctors, engineers, and it kind of acquired hegemony in the whole society. And finally, democratic functioning, that there were 32 organizations from Punjab, but 42 organizations from all over India, which themselves included 530 organizations. They took collectively decisions. There were differences, and they will resolve those differences. Eventually, they will reach a consensus and carry on their process of negotiation and organization in a democratic way. That was also a very important dimension of the success which the farmers' movement achieved in this struggle. Now, coming to further prospects and challenges, which obviously are important, that one, I would call it politics versus economic focus. That what the farmers have achieved so far is mainly an economic success, that they have been able to push back these 3 farming laws which the government had promulgated in 2020, and which would have affected the marketing of produce, which would have affected the transportation, which would have affected the storage of these foods. And they have pushed back that agenda of the government. And it has huge political implications, no doubt, this economic success, because this government, which is in power in India, the Hindu majoritarian government, it has been crushing all forms of dissent, whether the dissent came from students, intellectuals, Muslim minorities, even in Jammu and Kashmir, which is the only state with Muslim majority, a presidential rule was imposed on that, and its constitutional status as one state was dismantled. It was divided into 3 categories, which were directly under central control. And so all these forms of dissent, the Hindu national government was able to crush. This was the first struggle where they could not crush. They had to admit eventually defeat, and they had to agree that we are withdrawing these farms and we will think about instituting mechanism for minimum support price. So there was that political gain. But politics goes beyond the indirect implications of an economic victory. Politics goes into defeating the BJP, and that is very, very important, because if the BJP remains in power, and in another few years' time, in 2 years' time, 2024, there will be central election, general election, and where there will be fought. But in between, there will be regional elections, and West Bengal, I already mentioned, where the farmers' organization campaigned against the BJP. And it was a very intelligent electoral strategy, where they argued that don't vote for the BJP, vote for any other political party. We are not supporting any particular political party. That is so that they are not aligned or clubbed with agent of any political party. And they were able to succeed there. They were able to defeat the BJP, and the regional party in Bengal came into power. Now there are two important elections are coming. There are 5 states which are going into elections in February, but 2 of them are most important. UP, Uttar Pradesh, and Punjab. Uttar Pradesh is important because the biggest state, and it sends the largest number of members to the India's parliament, about 80 members out of 543. And Punjab, it's a relatively small state. It sends only 30 members, but it is a strategic state because it is the bastion of the farmers movement. And the BJP is trying to capture power in both. And the farmers organization has this challenge how to defeat BJP in both places. And there are difference of opinion in the case of Punjab. In UP, they're coming to a kind of consensus that they must appeal to the electorate to vote against BJP. But in Punjab, there has been a difference of opinion that one section, the majority section of the 32 organizations, have argued that we should form our own party, because unlike the UP and Bengal, where they could not have formed their own party and win the election, there's a possibility in Punjab that they can actually win the election and form the government in Punjab. So 22 organizations of the 32 have floated a new political party, and they are going to fight the elections. Others have differences on that. They want to remain only as the pressure groups. There's a logic behind both of them, but I personally support that the participating in elections is a wise and a strategically important decision. And so that's one, but the challenges are even bigger than that, and which has global consequences. And I'll come to that in a minute, that what kind of agrarian change is needed. It is very clear that agriculture forms only 20% of GDP, and it employs about 50% people. And the economic and ecological sustainability of marginal farmers, which in India are defined those who own less than 1 hectare of land, and small farmers who own between 1 and 2 acres of land. It is extremely important strategic goal that how we have to maintain ecological and economic sustainability of marginal farmers, that they are not overtaken by large farms, they're not overtaken by agribusiness corporations. And 86%, slightly over 86% of farmers are in this category of marginal and small. And that is absolutely significant for the farmers movement. Medium and large farmers, we can see farmers who own more than 10 acres are, about half the percent of large farmers. So India is a land, Indian agriculture is a sector which is predominantly dominated by marginal and small farmers. And that is extremely important for any agrarian strategy which farmers movement have. And that is central, I would say, to the farmers movement, how they devise a strategy to protect this section of 86% farmers in India. Coupled with that is a question of assured supply of subsidized food to low-income groups. The reforms which the government was bringing that would have dismantled the public distribution system. PDS stands for public distribution system, which means that the government buys the food from the farmers at a pre-declared price, which is called a minimum food price. So that does not apply to all the crops. It mainly applies to food crops, wheat and rice, and a little bit sometime to pulses and sugarcane and cotton, but mainly to the food crops. And through the subsidized ration shops, that food is sold to low-income groups, and 67% of India's population depend on that. So the agrarian sector is so important. The management, the governance of agrarian sector in India is so important to ensure sustainability of small and larger farmers, to use the farming sector to apply food to 67% of India's population who is dependent upon PDS, public distribution system. And so to draw upon greater theoretical and international significance, I would just articulate what I think is the best way of going forward, and which is a long-term perspective. In the medium term, you have to fight many fights, but the farmers movement also have to have a long-term perspective, which I call an eco-socialist perspective. Eco-socialist perspective is critical of the capitalist model of development, which is based on destruction of agriculture, which has happened in UK, USA, Europe, even other developed countries like Australia and New Zealand and Japan and Korea, which is basically seen that the path of progress is seen as one from agriculture to industry, from rural area to urban areas, and through that to increase in the scale of production and increase in productivity to achieve maximum economic growth. That is the old capitalist model, and that has led to destruction of agriculture. That is obviously not suitable for the long-term perspective which the farmers movement has. But I also have to emphasize that old socialist model, which was applied in Soviet Union, but also in the other countries in Eastern Europe, and to a great extent even in China now, and other Asian countries like Vietnam, which is also based on industrialization, and that we have to follow the same path of destroying agriculture to build up industrialization to ensure economic growth, except that it is not done through privatization, it is done through central planning. And Stalin's collectivization method was that destructive method, where large-scale destruction not only of agriculture, but actually annihilation of farmers took place. It was a very ruthless and undemocratic and authoritarian way of killing the peasantry and killing the agriculture, which was also destructive. It was destructive, one, because it was not economically, but both these methods were environmentally destructive also. And we can see the global climate change which is taking place in the advanced capitalist countries, even in the old socialist model. I'm using the word old socialist because I'm in favor of socialist alternative to capitalism, but not the old socialist way of model. So old socialist model was also flawed in putting so much emphasis on industrialization on large scale and destruction of agriculture and using undemocratic methods to destroy agriculture and the peasantry. Eco-socialist path is a critique of both methods. It is a critique of the capitalist model of industrialization, and it's also a critique of the old socialist model. The central aspect of the eco-socialist path is that is based on sustainability of small-scale agriculture in the age of global heating and biodiversity loss. That small-scale agriculture is very important to reduce carbon emissions. There are many scientific studies that show large-scale farming has more carbon emissions which contribute to global heating, and also leads to destruction of many species, which is contributing to a massive biodiversity loss, which sometimes is not recognized in the debates on climate change and so on and so forth. And so an eco-socialist path is a long-term path. Within that path, obviously, medium and short-term strategies will have to be fought by the Indian farmers movement and other farmers movement in other parts of the world, which have been looking very, very carefully at this movement and the success of this movement. And it's given them encouragement that farmers can utilize and organize, and they are not a sack of potatoes who sometimes are described in misunderstanding of Marx's view on that. Finally, to conclude my presentation, just kind of summarize that farmers have defeated, I would say temporarily, putting a question mark, they have defeated the farm laws aimed at takeover of agriculture by agro-business corporations. And I have mentioned two big agro-business businesses in India. One was Adani, which is for storage, and Adani in retail. And they are going to take over retail shops and bring into supermarket control by the Ambanis. And they're both very, very close to the Hindu nationalist Modi regime. And that's one reason which Modi regime was pushing, because it was trying to help these two big agro-business corporations, which are politically very close to this and economically fund BJP. This success has also weakened the move to increase centralization in Hindu nationalism, and which means that centralization of India is an integral part of the Hindu nationalist agenda, because centralization means that you weaken regional identities, you weaken linguistic diversities, you weaken ethnic diversities, and there are some states where Hindus are certainly not in a majority. Punjab is a Sikh majority state, Kashmir is a Muslim majority state, Mizoram, Nagaland are Christian majority states, and in many other places, Hindus are in a majority, like in Kerala. Hindus are the largest religious group, but they are not in a majority. There are Muslims and Christians who have a considerable proportion of the population. The Hindu nationalist agenda was that increase the power of centralization, and through centralization, weaken all these different forms of identities to bring one unifying Hindu nationalist identity. And farmers' movement, in an indirect way, has been able to hit at this agenda by weakening the BJP government, which controls at the center, which has this Hindu nationalist agenda of centralization at its core. And it is also questioning flawed models of development. Though this debate hasn't been central to the debate, but obviously some contributions have been making. I have been writing about this. Some other people have been also writing about this, that the Western capitalist models have specially come under critique in this. But the old socialist models have not been so much subjected to criticism, but eventually a kind of information is emerging, knowledge is emerging, that the old socialist models were also flawed. And so out of that, we need to develop a new development paradigm. And a new development paradigm is protection of small scale farming, which is critical to the sustainable future of planet Earth, and which I call the eco-socialist path, that the protection of small scale farming fits in very nicely and logically with the future of maintaining the planet Earth, both to reduce global heating as well as to maintain biodiversity. And the importance of this I can highlight by saying that the choice which we have is eco-socialism or barbarism. By this I mean that if we do not replace capitalism by an eco-socialist mode of governance of agriculture and their economies, it will lead to barbarism. By barbarism, I mean that massive biodiversity loss and eventually leading to environmental conflicts and global heating, which will have kind of consequences which we can't be foreseen. And this is coming very near. Many studies show that if by 2030, the global temperature is not reduced below 1.5 degrees, we are facing in almost threat to our planet. So choice is very, very critical. And farmers' organizations, farmers' protests, and farmers' perspective have to dip into this understanding that we have to argue and articulate an eco-socialist vision on farming and management of the economy. And this involves democratic mass mobilization of farmers and non-farmers, that the farmers' perspective has to percolate into non-farmers. We should not be seen as dividing between rural and urban and between agriculture and industry, that those sections of the population must be won over through democratic mobilization, through democratic articulation of this view to the urban population, to the industrial population. It is a very big struggle, but that is historically necessary and absolutely essential in order to prevent our planet going into barbaric destruction. I think I would end, but before that, I will give the references which include majority of my papers and which I've written over the period. And of this, the last paper is the most important, which I wrote with my daughter Tanya Singh and my wife Meena Danda, and which I think is one of the most comprehensive paper on discussing the economic changes, but also providing the understanding of the politics of protest. It was published in the journal Capitalism, Nature and Socialism. If any of you feel interested in getting a copy of this, you can send an email to Real Farming or to me, and I will be very happy to share any of those papers. I think I will conclude by this and will be happy to answer any questions later on. And after me, there will be Mr. Joginder Singh Ugrahan, who will speak for about, again, 15 minutes or so. And after all the three speakers, apart from me, have spoken, then we'll open it to question and answers. Thank you very much.
ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿਸਾਨ ਅੰਦੋਲਨ ਚੱਲਿਆ ਸਾਡਾ,
ਵੱਡਾ ਵਾਲਮ,
ਅਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਅੰਦੋਲਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਿਨੀਮਮ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੇ 3 ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ, ਖੇਤੀ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਮੋਦੀ ਹੁਕੂਮਤ ਨੇ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਂਦੇ ਸੀ, ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟਾਂ ਦਾ ਪੱਖ ਪੂਰਨ ਦੀ ਖਾਤਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ 3 ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਲਿਆਂਦੇ ਸੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀਆਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਮਿਨੀਮਮ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੇ ਇਕੱਠੀਆਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਇਕੱਲੇ ਖੇਤੀ ਸੈਕਟਰ ਦਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਇਹ ਮਜ਼ਦੂਰਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਆੜ੍ਹਤੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਲੇਬਰ ਇਹ ਮਾਰਕੀਟ ਕਮੇਟੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਟਰੱਕ ਯੂਨੀਅਨ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅਨਾਜ ਖਾਂਦੇ ਆ। ਵੀ ਅਨਾਜ ਕੰਟਰੋਲ ਦਾ ਮਸਲਾ ਹੈ, ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਹ ਲੜਾਈ ਵੱਡੀ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਵੱਡੇ ਇਕੱਲੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੋਂ, ਇਕੱਲੇ ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ, ਇਕੱਲੇ ਮਜ਼ਦੂਰਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੜੀ ਜਾਣੀ, ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਲੜਨੀ ਪੈਣੀ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਿਸ ਕੇ ਕੀਤਾ, ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚੋਂ ਅੰਦੋਲਨ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤਾ ਤੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਭਾਰਤ ਦਾ ਬਣਾਇਆ। ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਰੱਖੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਥੜੇ ਨੂੰ ਰਾਜਨੀਤਿਕ ਮੰਤਵਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਵਰਤਣ ਦੇਵਾਂਗੇ। ਇਸ ਥੜੇ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੈਰ ਧਰਮੀ, ਗੈਰ ਜਾਤੀ, ਕਿਸੇ ਇੱਕ ਸਟੇਟ ਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਨ ਦੇਣਾ, ਕਿਸੇ ਇੱਕ ਧਰਮ ਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਨ ਦੇਣਾ, ਕਿਸੇ ਇੱਕ ਜਾਤ ਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਨ ਦੇਣਾ। ਇਹਨੂੰ ਸਾਰੇ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਕਿਰਤੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਅੰਦੋਲਨ ਬਣਾ ਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਲੜੇ ਹਾਂ, ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਮਯਾਬ ਹੋ ਸਕੇ। ਹੈਲੋ ਹੈਲੋ ਹੈਲੋ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਬੋਲੀ ਚਲੋ,
ਮੇਰੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਜੀ?
5-7 ਮਿੰਟ ਹੋਰ ਬੋਲੋ।
ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਤਲਬ ਇਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਸਮਝਿਆ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ 3 ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਮੋਦੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਨੇ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਦੇ ਪੱਖ 'ਚ ਬਣਾਏ ਨੇ। ਜਿੰਨੇ ਮੋਦੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਨੇ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਲਏ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟਾਂ ਦੇ ਪੱਖ 'ਚ ਲਏ ਨੇ। ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਅਦਾਰੇ ਨੇ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਵਿੱਦਿਆ, ਸਿਹਤ ਸਹੂਲਤਾਂ ਨੇ, ਬਿਜਲੀ ਹੈ, ਰੇਲਵੇ ਹੈ, ਕੋਲੇ ਦੀਆਂ ਖਾਣਾਂ ਨੇ, ਬੰਦਰਗਾਹਾਂ ਨੇ, ਹਵਾਈ ਅੱਡੇ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਦੇ ਹਵਾਲੇ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਮੋਦੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਨੇ ਕਰ ਰੱਖਿਆ। ਤੇ ਮੋਦੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਦਾ ਇੱਕੋ ਹੀ ਮਨਸੂਬਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕਿਰਤੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਜੇਬ ਚੋਂ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੁਨਾਫੇ ਵਧਾਉਣ ਦਾ। ਉਹੀ ਮਨਸੂਬਾ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਮੋਦੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਚੱਲੀ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ। ਉਹਦੇ ਤਹਿਤ ਹੀ ਇਹ 3 ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਇਹ ਕਹਿ ਕੇ ਲਿਆਂਦੇ ਗਏ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਮਦਨ ਦੁੱਗਣੀ ਕਰ ਦੇਣਗੇ, ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਹੋਣਾ ਹੈ। ਪਰ ਹਕੀਕਤ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਉਲਟ ਹੈ। ਜਿੰਨੇ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਨੇ, ਵਨ-ਮੈਨ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ, ਇਕੱਲੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਨਾਲ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਸਿੱਟੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਨੁਕਸਾਨਦੇਹ ਨਿਕਲੇ ਨੇ। ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਲਾਕਡਾਊਨ ਦਾ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਨੋਟਬੰਦੀ ਦਾ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਧਾਰਾ 370 ਨੂੰ ਤੋੜਨ ਦਾ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਭਾਵੇਂ NRC ਦਾ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਹੋਵੇ। ਜਿੰਨੇ ਮੋਦੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਨੇ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਲਏ ਨੇ, ਮੋਦੀ ਨੇ ਇਕੱਲੇ ਨੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਲਏ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਮਨਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਲਏ ਨੇ। ਆਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ 3 ਕਾਨੂੰਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਹੈ, ਇਹ ਵੀ ਉਹਨੇ ਆਪਦੀ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਲਿਆ, ਬਿਨਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਸਲਾਹ ਕੀਤਿਆਂ। ਉਸ ਵਕਤ ਜਦੋਂ ਲੋਕ ਕਰੋਨਾ ਤੋਂ ਪੀੜਤ ਸੀ, ਘਰਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਨਿਕਲਦੇ, ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਲਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਮੋਦੀ ਦਾ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਮੌਕਾ ਹੈ, ਉਦੋਂ ਆਰਡੀਨੈਂਸ ਦੇ ਰੂਪ 'ਚ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਂਦਾ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨੇ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਬਣਾਏ ਤੇ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਬਣਾ ਕੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਠੋਸੇ ਤੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਫਾਇਦੇ ਦੀ ਖਾਤਰ ਕੀਤਾ। ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਸਮਝ ਗਏ ਸੀ, ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਾਉਣ 'ਚ ਕਾਮਯਾਬ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਖੋਹਣ ਦੀ ਖਾਤਰ, ਅੰਨ ਤੇ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਦਾ ਕਬਜ਼ਾ ਕਰਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਖਾਤਰ, ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਮੁਨਾਫੇ ਦੇਣ ਦੀ ਖਾਤਰ ਇਹ ਮੋਦੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਭਾਉਂਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਕਾਨੂੰਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ ਡਟ ਕੇ ਲੜੇ ਆ, ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਲੜੇ ਆ। ਸਾਰੇ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਕੀਤਾ। ਇਹ ਇਕੱਲਾ ਨਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਸੀ, ਨਾ ਹਰਿਆਣੇ ਤੇ ਯੂਪੀ ਦਾ ਸੀ, ਨਾ ਉੱਤਰਾਖੰਡ ਦਾ ਸੀ। ਇਹ ਭਾਰਤ ਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਮਦਦ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ। ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕ ਰਲ ਕੇ ਲੜੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਜਿੱਤੇ ਨੇ। ਤੇ ਮੋਦੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਨੂੰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਹੱਥਾਂ ਨਾਲ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੱਥਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਬਣਾਏ ਸੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਹੱਥਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਲਮ ਨਾਲ ਉਹੀ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਰੱਦ ਕਰਨੇ ਪਏ ਨੇ। ਇਹਦੇ ਚੋਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿਰਤੀ ਲੋਕ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਜਿੱਤਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਹਕੂਮਤਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਵਾਪਸ ਲੈਣੇ ਪੈਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਘੋਲ ਨੂੰ, ਆਪਣੇ ਅੰਦੋਲਨ ਨੂੰ, ਇਹਨੂੰ ਜਿੱਤ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚਾਉਣ 'ਚ ਕਾਮਯਾਬ ਹੋਏ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੱਦਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਕਿਸਾਨ ਭਰਾਵਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਸਾਰੇ ਕਿਰਤੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋ ਤਾਂ ਹਕੂਮਤਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਫੈਸਲੇ ਬਦਲਨੇ ਪੈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਇਸੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਰਹਿਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਪਰਾਲਾ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ।
So this was Joginder Singh Ugrahan, who is the head of the largest farmers organization in India, spread in almost all districts of Punjab, which was the epicenter of the farmers' struggle. And it is a very old organization, and he's been heading this, and which has also mobilized women and Dalit workers. So now I invite Navsharan, who's going to speak more specifically on the role of women and Dalit organization and agricultural workers. So Navsharan, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Pritam. Thank you for the opportunity. Delighted to be here. But I'm going to start and talk a little bit about women's presence and participation in the farm movement, which we witnessed at Delhi's borders. So let me just say that women had a stirring presence at the protest. They came with men marching to Delhi on November 26th, 27th, waving their union flags and braving the police barricades, water cannons, and tear gas attacks. But once at the borders, they settled down quickly. We know that the leadership of the farm movement is predominantly elderly male with they have decades of experience of mobilizing farmers on local demands, and there are over 32 unions in Punjab alone that were there at the protest site, as you've also mentioned, Pritam. And a few of these unions do have women's wing which are led by women, but by and large women are not in leadership positions in farm unions. However, women were the backbone of the back end. They were collecting food and funds, they were talking to the press, they were managing the stage, they were mobilizing support for the movement in the families. And in the build up to the Farmers' March to Delhi, women's role in mobilizing through the use of folk form jago, which is a folk form used in rural Punjab when there is when any festival or any ceremony has to happen. Women go around in the village late at night, singing and giving the message of the event. And women used jago message of the protest to an exemplary, in an exemplary manner, just run up to the this march. So to be noted, one important part is that women from Punjab were not first-time protesters. In the initial days of the farm protest, commentators from Delhi especially struggled to understand the phenomena of women joining the movement. There was an element of surprise while noting that, oh, quote unquote, thousands of them emerged from the seclusion of their homes in order to join the protests. But women in Punjab have been mobilized for at least 2 decades, if not more, and mostly by left farmer unions. This is a phenomenon of left farmer unions, and these are women from marginal and small land holding farming families. And over the years, farm unions mobilized women, as they were mobilizing, unions also encountered the question of women's citizenship, their right to public sphere, their right to participate in popular struggles, and some of the unions engaged with these questions seriously. So many farm unions have been marking, for instance, March 8th, International Women's Day, in a big way in Punjab, in rural areas. And on this day, they invite speakers from outside and hold rural conventions to educate their own cadre. And this has been happening for the last many years. I've been part of such rural events on March 8th. So women's mobilization is also connected with many aspects of Punjab's left legacy. But very significantly, Punjab has a very vibrant progressive cultural movement, which can be traced back to the late 60s. And today there are scores of rural theatre groups in Punjab, and we saw them regularly at the borders where farmers were protesting. These rural groups came and performed and inspired people who were sitting at the borders. And many of them are part of the umbrella organization called Punjab Lok Sabhyacharak Manch, which is a cultural platform committed to building a just society through a progressive cultural movement. All these groups do political theater, and women are both part of the audience and also the lead performers in these performances. Another very interesting tradition in Punjab has been the all-night cultural programs, a tradition which began during the years of militancy There used to be night curfews in Punjab from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And since the people could not go out anyway, they would collect before 9 p.m. and watch cultural programs all night. The tradition continued even after militancy ebbed, and these cultural programs mobilized women in large numbers, and women see themselves as part of the change movement. So women have been in Punjab in the public sphere, and I've been watching women participate in the struggles for the last many years. Women know why they are in the movement. So while the movement was on last year, the Chief Justice of India commented that women should go back, and women should, we respect our women so much. These are harsh conditions at the borders, and we feel very sorry for women and the elderly. And the Chief Justice actually appealed to farm leaders to send women back, which was extremely unfortunate. And many say that, oh, this is part of the attitude of many men towards women, but it was not. It was much deeper. I think it was about not accepting women's claim to the public space. The same judiciary, we know, has rejected the bail pleas of many women political under trials. The Supreme Court very well knows that anti-citizenship amendment activists, women protesters like Gulfisham Fatima, like Ishrat Jahan, have been arrested under the draconian unlawful activities Prevention Act, and they are still in prison. So the Chief Justice concern over women's participation in the farmer struggle and his concern about the harsh conditions at the borders did not square up at all. My belief is, and many others believe it, that the state wants half of India's people to be locked up in their homes so that they have to deal only with the remaining 50%. But today, women's presence is acknowledged in the farm movement, and women's formidable presence has successfully broken the convention where politics is imagined as a male arena of activity, and the layer of masculinity attributed to the farmers' movement actually stands demolished today, and we say it with much pride. The movement also saw a number of women leaders emerge who will now be important actors in the unions, and this movement was also important for women to reflect on earlier movements where women have been part. And we know from the history, right from Tebhaga and Telangana movement to also movements in Punjab like Better Khush Hasaiti movement, the anti-betterment levy movement that happened in the 50s and the 60s, where women were very active. But once the movement was over, the women were expected to go back to cooking chapatis and endure domestic violence silently. So these issues came up in the conversations at the borders. And the failure of the leadership of the earlier movements to understand and theorize the nature of participation of women, or paying attention to what they were saying to help to transform the gender social relations, was clearly on women's watch. They threw back the challenge at the present leadership of farm movement that this struggle will only be half as strong, half as vibrant if women had not joined the movement. And let me come to my second point now about, after the presence of movement, what did women bring to the farm movement? Agrarian crisis, as we all know, is writ large on the body politic of rural India. Landlessness, falling incomes and rising costs of farming, mounting farm debts, ecological crisis manifesting in degradation of environment, of health and water, lack of employment in farm sector, especially for women, and increasing hold of corporate giants on the lives of farmers, to name only a few, are part of the crisis. The crisis also erupted in the form form of suicides of farmers and agriculture labor who were unable to repay farm loans. While farming families bore these crises collectively, the suicides affect women profoundly as they are left to pick up the threads which men suddenly drop. Pick up the responsibilities of farming, of repaying the debts, demanding compensation from the state, and caring for the family. So in late January in 2011, just a month after the morcha began at the borders, women farmers and laborers from the families of farm suicides in Punjab joined the protesting farmers at the borders. They carried with them the pictures of their dead relatives. Some held two, embodying the crisis. From the Bibi Gulab Kaur protest stage, where these women, the families assembled, when they held the grainy pictures high of their dead relatives, it was like a wave of corpses rising. And I remember Joginder Singh ji Ugrahan was at that time, and he said from the stage that the debt-ridden families have been carrying their dead on their shoulders. With the new laws, the crop of suicide will only swell. And so women had brought to the protest their experience of crisis, not only of losing husbands, fathers, or sons to farm debts, but also came women laborers who are landless, but dependent on land for their livelihoods, which was now threatened. We learned from them that if cotton crop fails due to bollworm disease, farmers suffer the loss of their crop, but the farm workers, mostly women, lose their seasons of employment. Farmers seek compensation for a failed crop, but who compensates lost labor? So women asked these questions, and came the farmer women who had no land and no prospects of employment, coming to the borders asking, what is in it for us in these laws? So with their joining the movement, the farm movement's claims on state have expanded. Women have been working in their unions, but they have also been organizing themselves. Kisan Mazdoor Khudkushi Peedit Parivar Committee, Committee of Farmers and Labor Suicide Victim Families, is a shining example. This committee was founded by a young person, Kiranjeet Kaur, a young university student whose father died because of farm crisis. And she, after he died, she had been going from village to village collecting data on women whose husbands, sons, fathers-in-law committed suicide. The committee calls these suicides institutional murders. And these heroic efforts of Kiranjeet Kaur always remind me of Kashmir's Parveena Ahangar, whose young son was disappeared by the army, and she went on to form the Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons, APDP, collecting information on all disappeared who had fallen victims to fake encounters and extrajudicial killings and who never returned to the families. So women have been picking up important battles in every context, but also in Punjab. So the women's experience, as I see it, of agrarian crisis is far more intense. So with their joining, the movement no longer remains about state protection through MSP, but women also put on public imagination the demand of land to the landless, guaranteed minimum wages for farm jobs, and equal wage for farm operations. And as we watched them on the borders living under extreme harsh conditions, which were made harsher by state apathy for more than a year, we saw them fighting the state's war of attrition with equal calm confidence. I don't think I have much time, Pritam, but if you give me a minute more, I'd like to just talk about international solidarity. Also, if there were questions about labor, then I'll come specifically to them. But the farmers received international messages of solidarity, pouring in not only from Indian diaspora, but also from major unions of UK, Canada, US, and these messages of solidarity also help the farmers to locate their movement as part of a protest against larger global corporate capitalist agenda. There's also an outpouring of life stories of farmers from around the world about being bled by the hard edge of corporate agriculture. And we received it from not only the United States, but also from Malaysia, from Indonesia, where farmers talked of their experience of corporate farming. As we know, Noam Chomsky called Indian farmers' struggle as beacon of hope for the world in dark times. And he said the farmers were doing the right thing with courage, integrity for the benefit of their families and for the entire world. UK's, I'd like to specifically mention UK's Global Women's Strike has been in touch throughout the movement, extending solidarity to women farmers and to farmers movement largely, extending solidarity and also amplifying the message of farmer struggle. So these are ways in which the farmers movement in India actually struck a wider chord to talk about, to bring to light how the lives of farmers, the lives of rural people were being controlled by a corporate capitalist agenda, which needed to be challenged, which needed to be focused on to fight and also liberate people from the miseries they have been pushed to. So I'm going to end here, and we'll talk more about the farmer labor alliances, or the class alliance that began emerging also in the movement, if the time permits. Thanks, Pritam.
Yeah. Thank you, Navsharan, for this brilliant presentation, as being witnessed by people in the chat as well, and highlighting the role of women, that women actually transform the debates, the questions which take place, and the nature of the movement, and how international organizations which work among the farmers' movement and the agrarian movements need to recognize that how gender relations have to be transformed if farmers' movement have to succeed against corporate takeover of agriculture and defend small-scale farming, organic farming, natural farming. So this Indian experience has huge international significance, especially on the role of women. I'm sure we can talk more about it, but possibly we can deal with some of the questions. I would now request Navkiran, who is also a young scholar, but also very active in the movement, especially in developing an alternative media. I mean, to emphasize the importance of her work, that Indian media now is heavily controlled by the state, and it kind of gives the narrative which the state wants. And so the farmers' movement at a very early stage recognized that we have to develop an alternative media. And they developed this alternative media in very different forms. So Navkiran is going to talk about that. How are they able to develop this alternative media? And that was also one of the main sources of strength, that the state did not have only voice, that there was alternative voice, and which shone through, spread throughout the country. And people like Navkiran played a very important role in developing that alternative media against the state. So Navkiran, you are 15 minutes for you.
Thank you so much, Pritam, for the introduction, and also for having me today. And as as all of you have listened the earlier speakers and realized that the Indian farmers movement, if wasn't new, but was quite interesting from many aspects, like the number of people who participated in the movement, or the number of women participants in the struggle, the geographical location of the protest in itself, the duration and form of the movement, and also the different modes of resistance which started during the movement, like protest libraries or the protest newsletters, and the protest sites in itself became temporary villages for the protesters. So like from all these aspects, maybe it wasn't the first time it all happened, but definitely it was quite interesting to observe them closely and now to talk about them. And also taking the rabid hatred and the lies spread by the BJP government and the BJP IT cell here in India, I guess it is the first time that a resistance movement has taken the virtual challenge seriously, and has given a meaningful political counter to the domination of BJP on the same contested space. All of this hasn't happened on its own. Rather, the young generation was deliberately given these responsibilities to take up the virtual challenge, and so that the technology and language don't become an obstruction for the popular movement. This movement has taught us that when the government gains total hegemony of all media and communication channels, the people turn to new ways and mediums to voice their resistance. And today I would like to talk about social media, which sometimes we consider as an alternative, and also about the actual alternative medias, which I guess we witnessed during the farmers movement in India. So I too have been an active part of one such protest tool or protest newsletter, and have closely witnessed its role and contribution towards the movement. So we collectively started a newsletter named Trolley Times. So during the initial days of the movement, when the media, means the pro-state or the corporate media and the government, was constantly trying to demonize the movement, very few people spoke up for the farmers. This was exactly the time when the youth participating in this movement decided to start newsletters and decided to start using social media as an organized campaign. And that was the time when initiatives like Tractor to Twitter started, and also many new social media handles, say Tractor to Twitter or Tractor Talks, and all these started on different social media platforms, say Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, on such platforms. And that was also the time when we started bilingual newsletter Trolley Times. So the movement and the time we are living in has made us realize that mere criticism of mainstream media will not suffice us. So although the Trolley Times, the newsletter, may have certainly came out in the backdrop of corporate media becoming a government's mouthpiece, but we tried not to limit it to merely counter the pro-state media's narrative or fact check them. We were there with our agenda of setting up what good journalism ought to be. So the Trolley Times creation, not just a reaction that drove us, the creation of democratic, constitutional, egalitarian ethos. So, and also our editorial team always made sure that the intersectionality of the participant, which we also like listened from Navsharan, the participation of agrarian workers or Dalits and women. So we made sure that that reflection should be there, whether it's gender, caste, class, or region, religion. And nothing surprising, but there have been attempts from the state to like muzzle our voices too, as they always did for any like resistance movement. So like drawing this introduction, now I want you to think about this idea of using social media as an alternative during the movements, which we heard a lot during the recent past. And there are many similarities between the movements we have witnessed in 2010s, like the global movements I'm talking about here, like the Arab Spring or 2019 Hong Kong protest or the Black Lives Matters, and now the farmers movement here in India. During all these movements, social media played a really important role. So like many journalists, academicians, activists, they coined the term alternative media for social media platforms too, after witnessing all these movements. But we can't forget the fact that a right wing is also using the social media extensively, I guess. More than what the people did during all these movements, and they are using the same social media handles for spreading their agendas, for spreading communal hatred, especially talking about India, and also Brazil is a live example of this. So I guess looking from that aspect, I guess like it can't work as an alternative. Social media can't work as an alternative because it's also under state control, and I guess becoming more and more under the control of state by each passing day. And we also witnessed during the farmers movement when Twitter shut down many Twitter accounts of activists and celebs who were supporting the farmers movement. So and not just Twitter, many Instagram handles were deleted, and like we have witnessed all this. And also, so we can't say that the social media spaces are unbiased or they are free. So social media can't be taken as the sole alternative to the pro-state or corporate media houses. It's basically a hit and run scenario. So sometimes it works when like sometimes it doesn't. So success of media and social media, where we are taking it as an alternative, also depends on multiple other factors, like the number of people it is reaching out to, or the number of people it is educating, or the authenticity or the unbiased nature of the news. And I believe social media doesn't fulfill all these factors. So so there's a problem of taking social media as an alternative, and that's precisely a reason why we started an alternative media in itself, which was Trolley Time. So it was a newsletter, it was a media initiative with by the young protesters who were part of the movement. So, and I guess that's the reason why role of media becomes really important even during the time of social media or during the digital time, because like the responsibility a media should hold, it's not applicable for the social media users. I believe that. And in trolley times, we didn't simply reported the movement as many social media pages were doing, but try to place it in larger context, larger historical context, and in the context of current global political scenarios. Because one thing which we realized that, as I said earlier, maybe from many aspects, this movement is not new, but definitely interesting. Say the movement, the political agenda, it was resisting the agenda of corporatization or of land grab. So we have witnessed many farmers movement, also tribal movements during the recent past, where people were struggling or resisting on the same political agenda against the corporatization and land grab. So this wasn't a new movement in that perspective, but yes, it was very interesting for this part of the country, or this part of the globe. And also, I believe people's movement is at the core at every political movement, because I think mainly for our generation, many people think that digital activism in itself is a thing, and like it can exist independently, which I don't agree with. During this movement also, we witnessed a very fine balance between this virtual political campaign, which was resisting the agenda of hatred spread by BJP, and on the other hand, the core of the movement was the actual political movement on ground. So definitely these social media campaigns or social media activism can exist along with the ground activism, but in itself, I guess, it can't be an political alternative to the ground politics, ground level politics. So I guess, we have witnessed this in all the recent movements, during the all recent movements. So definitely, I would say there are a lot more points we can conclude from the movement. We can learn from this movement. Talking about international solidarities, social media helped us a lot, because the protest Navsharan was mentioning, that the solidarity protests were happening across the globe, say the US, the UK, or European. So definitely social media platforms helped us in like showing those global solidarities, because everything was happening live. We were able to see all those protests happening across the globe, sitting in India in the farmers movement on the protest side. So in that way, it really helped us. It helped us in making global solidarities. It made us more connected. But definitely for an alternative media space, we have to build an actual media spaces which has to be free from this state control, which social media is definitely not. And so in the end, I will conclude by saying that the current farmers protests brought issues of agriculture, labor, and rural communities to the fore, when the media and policy narratives follow finance, capital, tech, and big businesses. In spite of op-eds by pro-corporate, pro-government thinkers, media and government downplaying it, the concerns of protesting farmers and laborers are being asserted, and independent media initiatives like us, or newsletters like Karti Dharti or Delhi Border, they played an important role in it, because I guess an engagement with fights for fairer systems for laborers, farmers, and rural communities whenever you are is a fight worth joining. So yeah, I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation on the alternative media. We move to now questions and answers. And if I can pick up some questions from the chats and some from the question answers session. One question which I think Jessica has asked and Lisa in the question answers is, what lessons the farmers movement in other parts of the world can draw from this struggle? Which obviously is the most important question, because that is the topic of the panel, that international significance. I will try to kind of club all the four contributions which we have made by answering this question, and my other contributors can also join in. Number one, it is very important to understand that the farmers movement is not built in a day. This farmers movement was so strong, many people saw they suddenly emerged. It did not emerge suddenly. There were decades of work in villages and blocks in local areas where farmers organization, Mr. Ugrahan's organization, and the other 32 organizations with different time periods have been working day and night with minor problems, day-to-day problems of the farmers. So one thing to recognize is that it takes long time to establish your credibility, and that credibility is based on dealing with your day-to-day problems of the farmers organization, so that you build trust with the larger farmer organization. Number one. Number two, it is very important to project farmers movement as not only a sectarian movement only affecting the farmers. It is to project the farmers movement as protecting the interest of whole society. And in this, the agriculture has to be placed at the center of discussions. And this is especially important. It is gaining in India also, but it actually needs to, that protecting agriculture is very important from the viewpoint of protecting the planet Earth. The threat of global warming and biodiversity loss which we face, we can't go back to old models of development from agriculture to industry to services. That protection of agriculture is very central, protection of land, protection of soil, protection of water, which is central to agricultural production and food production, is the future. Agriculture is not the past, agriculture is the future. That mindset has to change, both theoretically as well as politically. Third, that when building a movement like this, that farmers have to build ties of friendship with non-farmers, with urban areas. One of the successes of this movement was that urban people did not think that this farmers movement is only for the rural areas. They felt that they are providers of food. And one word which was used quite often in the movement was called Andata. Andata means people who provide us food. So this narrative was very, very important, that these are people who provide food. And everyone who was not even associated with rural areas agriculture was able to understand that a daily provision of food is provided by these farmers. So that invited a lot of sympathy and support for the farmers movement. That the people who are fighting there, they are the people who day to day provide what we eat, and our sustenance is depend upon that. The fourth has that there were different political tendencies and political differences. And what was amazing about this movement was, and that's a lesson farmers movement and other part of the world should kind of draw from this, is end of sectarianism, because that is a very big problem in very political movements, that one tendency thinks that we have the truth on our side, all others are wrong. Here, they were interacting with different organizations who had different political inspirations, who had different historical traditions, and they recognized the differences, but they worked together, they respected each other. And that is very important, that sectarianism has to come to an end. Multiple faiths, multiple insights have to be provided as long as your goal is there. And as Ugrahan Sahib has emphasized the role of long-term struggle, and Navsharan has articulated the role of women, which is very, very important. And she mentioned very briefly that there are other fault lines which are specific to India, which is caste, and which again this farmers movement was able to overcome. And that the people who were earlier less represented in these movements, they need to come into force. And the role of women is very, very central. They are 50% of the Indian population and more than 50% of the population in many developed countries. Their participation is absolutely central to the success of any movement, whether it's farmers' movement or other movement. And also provide a new voice, which the contribution by Navkiran has pointed out, that though the overall media, mainstream media, is providing a different kind of narrative, which happens in America, which happens in this country, that we have to think of new ways of communicating. And it might be at a very decentralized level. It might be through magazines, it might be through social media, even putting up new YouTube channels and so on and so forth. So different forms of communication are very, very important. And the role of languages, that in this moment, because large number of people were from North India and mainly from Punjab, the alternative media provided enormous amount of information in Punjabi, which is the mother tongue of people of Punjab, which was very central, that those people may not be able to understand English or Hindi, but they were able to understand Punjabi and some material in Hindi, so that the North Indian and other parts of the India, they provided through those languages. So understanding the linguistic diversity of the participants is very important, and providing those information through those different languages is very important to connect with them and to enthuse. And of course, Navkiran and Navsharan's participation also shows the youth was very active. Sometime farmers movement is only, shows old people are participating, and this youth played very important role. And what was important was that different kinds of abilities, different kinds of talents were used. There were singers, popular singers who kept the organizations, the movement not only entertained but also inspired. There were filmmakers, there were digital technologists, there were doctors, there were schools being run. So an alternative civilization was being created, and that was very, very inspiring and allowed what Mao says, 100 flowers to bloom, that different tendencies, different political points, different organizations, different identities have to participate, and we have to respect them to build a broad-based movement, which is not seen as the movement only of one section of society. It should be seen as protecting the interests. And this movement is very important because agro-business capitalism is coming everywhere. In America and UK, Europe, they have already dominated. The biggest capitalists in the world, like Bill Gates and Ted Turner, they are also one of the biggest landowners. They are looking upon agriculture as a way of making returns, because returns from industry and finances are declining, and therefore, and that was a part of the farm laws which the Indian government was trying to bring, and the farmers' movement was able to withdraw. So I would say, in reply to very important questions asked by Jessica and Lisa, that the international lessons which the farmers' movement can derive from this struggle is mass mobilization on a long-term basis, patience, and involving all sections of society, and presenting farmers' movement as not only a movement of one section of society, but for the advancement of all sections of society, and also putting agriculture at the center of future alternative, that is for the protection of the planet. If there is any other important question which people want to ask, or if Navkiran or Ugrahan Saab or Navkiran want to make, because I think the main purpose here is for listeners who are coming from different countries, is that they want to see how this movement can inspire, give lessons to other movements, farmers' movements in other parts of the world. Ugrahan Saab, ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੁਝ ਬੋਲਣਾ ਚਾਹੋਗੇ 1 ਮਿੰਟ ਲਈ ਕਿ ਕੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਲੈਸਨਸ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟਸ, ਫਿਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਹਾਂਜੀ 1-2 ਮਿੰਟ ਲਈ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਫਾਰਮਰਸ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਲਈ ਕਿਹੜੇ ਲੈਸਨਸ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਤੋਂ ਡਰਾ ਕੀਤੇ ਜਾ ਸਕਦੇ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਜੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਭਾਸ਼ਾ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ, ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਧਰਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ, ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਜਾਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ, ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਸਟੇਟਾਂ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ, ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਵਿਚਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਮਿਨੀਮਮ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਜੇ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ ਖੜੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ ਤਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੀ ਤਾਕਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹਰਾ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੋਵੇ। ਸਾਡਾ ਇਹ ਮੰਨਣਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਆਈਡੀਓਲੋਜੀ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ, ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਧਰਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਹਕੂਮਤਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਆਈਆਂ ਨੇ, ਭਾਸ਼ਾਵਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਂ ਤੇ, ਰਾਜਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਧਰਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਭੇੜ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਰਾਜ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਪਾਲਿਸੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਰਾਜ ਕਰਦੀਆਂ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਮਿਨੀਮਮ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੇ ਜੇ ਲੋਕ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਲੜ ਪੈਣ ਤਾਂ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਸਿਰ ਝੁਕਾ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਹੈ, ਹਥਿਆਰ ਸੁੱਟ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਹੈ। ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਵਾਰ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਨੰਗੇ ਚਿੱਟੇ ਲਖੀਰ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ ਲੜਾਈ ਲੜ ਸਕਿਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਘਰਾਣਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਅੱਡੇ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਦੁਕਾਨਾਂ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨਾ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਕਿ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਸਮਝ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਮੋਦੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਵਰਗੀਆਂ ਹਕੂਮਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਈਆਂ ਨੇ 1991 ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ, ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨਵੀਆਂ ਆਰਥਿਕ ਨੀਤੀਆਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਆਏ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਦੇ ਪੱਖ ਪੂਰਦੀਆਂ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੀਤੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਤਹਿਤ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਿਰਤ ਦੀ ਲੁੱਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਦੇ ਢਿੱਡਾਂ 'ਚ ਪਾਉਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਹੈ। ਨਵੀਆਂ ਆਰਥਿਕ ਨੀਤੀਆਂ, ਵਿਸ਼ਵ ਵਪਾਰ ਸੰਸਥਾ, ਕੌਮਾਂਤਰੀ ਮੁੰਦਰਾ ਕੋਸ਼ ਤੇ ਵਿਸ਼ਵ ਬੈਂਕ, ਇਹ ਤਿੰਨੇ ਸੰਸਥਾਵਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਇਹ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਪੱਖੀ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਨੀਤੀਆਂ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਪੱਖੀ ਨੇ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਹਕੂਮਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੀਆਂ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਨਰਸਿਮਹਾ ਰਾਓ ਦੀ ਹੋਵੇ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਮੋਦੀ ਦੀ ਹੋਵੇ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੀ ਹੋਵੇ, ਉਹ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਦੀਆਂ ਨੀਤੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੁਨਾਫਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਧਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਖਾਤਰ ਕਿਰਤੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦਾ ਖੂਨ ਚੂਸ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੁਨਾਫਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਵਾਧੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਇਸੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਨਿਕਲਣ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਜਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਨੀਤੀਆਂ ਪਾਲਿਸੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਪੱਖੀ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਕਿਰਤੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਕਰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਨਾ ਉੱਥੇ ਧਰਮ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੈ, ਨਾ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾਤ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੈ, ਨਾ ਸਟੇਟ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਸਾਡੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਾਉਣ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਾਮਯਾਬ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਧਰਮ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਇੱਥੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਰੋਟੀ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੈ। ਉਹ ਮੁਨਾਫਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ ਦੇ ਮੁਨਾਫਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਬਚ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ, ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੈ। ਆਪਦੇ ਧੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਬਚਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ, ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਨੀਮਮ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੇ ਜੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਲੜੀਏ ਤਾਂ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਤਾਕਤ ਦੇ ਮੂਹਰੇ ਖੜਦੀ ਨਹੀਂ। ਇਹ ਸਬਕ ਨਿਕਲਦਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਅੰਦੋਲਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਕਿ ਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਲੋਕ ਗੱਲ ਸਮਝ ਆ ਜੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਲੋਕ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਤੇ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਵੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਤੇ ਜਿੱਤਦੇ ਵੀ ਨੇ। ਇਹ ਸਬਕ ਨਿਕਲਿਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਇਸ ਅੰਦੋਲਨ।
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Daniel Cruz has asked his question now. Very briefly, he's asked about Vandana Shiva's work. We have serious reservations about the authenticity of her work and also her political approach. But I don't want to go into that question. So we will not, deal because that's a very contentious issue. But she did not have any influence in this movement because much of our politics is not liked by the organizations who were involved in this struggle. His second question was, I think, about wondering about the characteristics of the farmers that led the struggle. I think that has been asked, that has been answered. But one aspect is true that a major part of the struggle was from Punjab and Haryana and other northern states like UP. And the reasons were two. One, that these were the states which were directly affected by these laws because minimum support price, which is a kind of price paid for agricultural products to have reasonable income, was being abolished. So the farmers were directly affected by these laws. And secondly, they were close to Delhi. It is not true that the farmers' movement was only confined into North India. There was in Karnataka, in Bengal, in Maharashtra, but they are very far away. India is a very, very big country. And therefore, farmers from there could not transfer and kind of come to Delhi, but there was equally participation, and even the remote corner of the India, there was a struggle, but certainly the participation of Punjab farmers was very important. And I might also emphasize some of the religious traditions of Sikhism played a very important role, and which is gradually being recognized, and that is the strength of learning process in this. That the left had a kind of I would say stereotyped understanding of the religion, and that debate is being opened by this struggle. And religion can be sectarian, can be divisive, but religion can also be very inspiring. And Sikh religion, which is based on egalitarianism and struggle for justice and martyrdom, has provided a lot of inspiration to people, and therefore the image of the Sikhs have been transformed in this country. In India. Before that, the Indian government was able to present Sikhs as terrorists and secessionists. Now Sikhs are being seen as people who serve, who are compassionate, who are peaceful people, who are able to struggle for the poor. So that is also very, very important. Navkiran or Navsharan, do you want to say one or two points about the international significance, international lessons?
Absolutely. Just a couple of quick thoughts. Pritam, one on the question on lessons that can be learned, and I think Ugrahan Sahab has answered that question. One word is unionize, unionize, unionize. This movement was built on the strength of unions, which have been working very hard in every state, especially in Punjab, and that's what Punjab was able to give the leadership because it was so firmly unionized. The second lesson, which I think is extremely important, is that for the last many years, ever since this regime came to power, we've been seeing that the regime has been pulverizing the rights of people section by section. It's Adivasis who are picked up at one time, their lands taken away. Then there are Muslims, they are separately targeted, Dalits are targeted, then women, then small sections of working people like the Anganwadi workers, the nurses, the informal sector workers. So section by section, the rights of people are taken away by imposing an agenda, corporate agenda. This movement provided a platform where people could learn about their oppressions. And I saw, and all of us are witness to it, those who've been following this movement, that the protest stage, which came up at the borders, became actually a school, a university for learning, where people came from different not only parts of India, but from different walks of life. And they came and talked about how they were being bled by the corporate agenda. So came farmers from Himachal, for instance, apple growers, whose life's precarious balance was being shattered by Mr. Adani's agri firm by quoting some price, which is arbitrary. We saw women farmers from Western UP coming to, Central UP coming to the protest stage, talking about how in UP, the cow protection laws, which are so arbitrary, have actually made their lives hell, because now there are stray cattle and their lives have been taken over by these stray animals, which have been let loose on them by the arbitrary state policy of cow protection law. So this stage provided a platform where all kinds of different operations could be talked about, and an attempt to build larger alliances can be made. So one of the lessons, that a profound lesson which came from this movement, is how to build solidarity, how to build alliances, so that your movements are not fought in silos, in small numbers, but they become larger movements, which are then making state more accountable, holding the state to account not on one, not on two questions, but on their larger agenda. So I think I would like to underline this question, or this lesson which came out of the movement of building alliances.
Now, Karan, you want to say 1 minute?
Definitely. I'm totally agree with Navsharan and what Mr. Ugrahan said. And interesting, another interesting thing which I guess we should learn from the farmers movement is are the ways in which farmers have chosen to register their protest. The decision of the farmer unions to lock down the toll plazas, which although mainly happened in Punjab and Haryana, has hit where it hurts the most, the corporate monopoly capitalism. So, so the farmers wasn't only resisting the government or the state, but the Ambani, Adani, Modi trial. The corporate alliances have incurred major losses directly at the hands of the struggling people, and the movement also gave new means and methods of resistance to people. The boycotting of Reliance petrol pumps in Punjab, the blockade of rail lines going towards Adani's mega silos and logistical parks, online appeals to boycott Reliance products. So these were just like few names, but I guess this was an interesting thing to learn from this protest, which I guess we can incorporate in our future protests, which I'm sure will definitely happen in the given scenario. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Navkiran. I might say that if you're not able to answer the questions now, I have left my email address in the chat, and you're most welcome to send those questions. But there are two questions which I've seen in the question answer session. One was on the role of the police, and the other was how do we connect the non-farmer population? And the question was being asked that in UK, the urban population does not connect with the farming. On the question of police, it was very interesting that the farmers movement was able to win even sympathy among the police people. Part of the reason was that even when the police was used against them, farmers did not show hostility to them. I mentioned about Langar, which is a collective kitchen, an institution which comes from Sikhism, but it's becoming more popular now, that those constables or police people were served food with the same humility as they were being sold. So people who were there to beat them up, they knew that these people are so kind that we are supposed to repress them, but they are so kind to serve us food. So they were able to win over the sympathy from the police also. So it is very important to address the police people also as employees of the state, and also to show them concern and sympathy. Sometimes they are forced to use that repression. So that was very, very successful. On the question of the other reason, of course, was also this, which is not very common in UK, it's very difficult to duplicate. Large number of police people came from farming family backgrounds. Their parents, grandparents were farmers. So they had direct experience of them, direct sympathy with them. They could see that these men and women who are coming, they are like their fathers and mothers and uncles and aunts and their brothers and sisters. So they could empathize with them. And the state knew about this. One of the reasons the state did not use repression is they knew that there could be protest within the police, within the army, that if their repression is used, because large number of recruits in the army and the police come from these farmers organizations, especially from North India, Punjab, Haryana, Western UP. So which may not apply in other places, but by and large, in large agrarian societies, it is the people from farming communities who join the police and the army, because that is the kind of easiest profession to go into. On the question of engagement, it is true that large part of the urban population does not really understand the agriculture. So I would think it's a difficult question to answer. I wouldn't say that I have a ready-made answer, but my view is that it is constant engagement, that through local actions, local activities, which many of the farmers and laborers organizations do in Britain, that you have to engage with them to bring out the importance of food, to import the importance of milk which they use, the importance of vegetables which they use, that for your daily living, you are dependent upon people who are producing these food or who are marketing these produce, who are bringing it to the market, and that will change the attitude. It is not the farming is a backward and old profession, but it is a profession which is actually for the savior of humanity and the planet Earth. And I think bringing agriculture as a vital sector for protecting the environment is very, very important. And given the increasing importance of the global climate change discourse, it is very important, especially in the developed countries, to bring agriculture as an important sector which need to be preserved. Because I'm an economist, and we have been taught very wrong economic theory that agriculture has to dwindle and industrialization and services have to come, and we have to now present a new economic theory, and which of course even non-economists have to also imbibe, that agriculture is not the past, agriculture is not backward, agriculture is the future. Protection of land and agriculture is the future of the world, and that's the only way, and that will enable us to connect people who are not directly engaged in agriculture. When they can see that protection of agriculture is not a sectional protection, it's a protection of the whole humanity. And that is a dialogue which we need to bring forward, that it's not the past, it's not backward, it is going forward, it's the future of humanity. I think we have 1 or 2 more minutes. If someone has very eager question, they can post it. If I am not able to see that, they can, kind of highlight. Yes, Emily Roop has asked about the historical significance of caste alliances. I think now Navsharan briefly mentioned that agricultural laborers, for example, come from what are called lower castes, and the farmers come from slightly middle caste. This has been a problem in India in mobilization. And one of the strengths of this movement was to overcome those caste alliances, partly because at the site where the farmers were protesting, they overcame these caste distinctions, that the farmers who came from middle caste, they were sweeping, they were cleaning the toilets, and the Dalit workers who in the past saw that these people would not do this work, were able to see this work. The food which was being served, there was no distinctions, there was no untouchability. So in this struggle, that was one very admirable part, that the caste distinctions were being overcome. The challenge now is that what we did, that the farmers movement did at the morcha, at the site where the struggle was being lodged, whether those kind of cultural changes which were brought about, they're able to incorporate in day-to-day life when they've gone back to their villages. How they're able to attack patriarchy, who are able to attack caste prejudices, and bring, but I'm sure there will be lessons. There may be pits and falls, but there will be lessons. Something which is enduring is that we need to overcome the distinctions if we have to fight authoritarian governments. And one final point I want to make is that farmers' movement was also able to show that protection of democracy is only possible if the farmers' movement succeeds. And that one support from a lot of intellectuals, liberals, journalists who were not connected with the farmers' life and agriculture, but they saw that if the farmer movement succeeds, we have some hope of the success of the farmers' movement. And that has been a very, very big victory, because the authoritarian government in India has been crushing all dissident movements. But this is one movement where they have to surrender, and which doesn't mean that they are going to keep silent, They will think of counter strategies. They're already thinking of counter strategies, but one big battle has been won, which is also for democracy. And that also appeals to people beyond the rural sector, which is another lesson which we need to govern, whether in America or in this country, that farmers also need to present this also as a political battle. And it's not only purely an economic battle, it's a fight for democracy. I think that our probably time is getting over, but I don't know if the organizers would allow us a few more minutes. Helen? Can we carry on or we have to leave? Hello? Any of the interpreters who know about this? I'm sorry, I'm okay, all right. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to Ugrahan Sahab, thank you to Navkiran, thank you to Navsharan for your brilliant participation, and thank you all of you who have listened. And we have provided our email if you have more questions. I'm sorry some questions could not be answered, but it is a very inspiring moment, and there are many lessons to learn from this. And I hope it will contribute to other discussions. Thank you very much.